I love hidden paths.
And so what do you like about hidden paths? And what do we mean when we say hidden paths?
It's just like a route in a game where it's not obvious and it's not the mainstream way of playing it. It's like weird to call it not intended because obviously it's intended.
You mean like a path that's not necessarily essential to the story or essential to the main path of the game?
Yeah, and I think it's most applicable in games that require you to traverse space. I think there's few times and places in the genre of like a puzzle game, but in a platformer or like a RPG, hidden paths definitely are one of the staples of those genres.
What are some of your favorite examples of hidden paths in games that you've played?
My favorite example of a hidden path in a game is when the hidden path leads to something lore related. I don't always necessarily need to have some kind of physical reward as long as like the lore that is uncovered from finding this hidden path is juicy enough. In the White Palace in Hollow Knight, there is this room I think it's called the Infirmary. The lore here is basically showing where a lot of the vessels were raised, which is like super cool. Finding all these hidden rooms in the White Palace, I'm pretty sure all of them have nothing inside it except more lore about the story. You can find the room where the Collector was born, but there's like nothing in there.
One thing I additionally like about the Hollow Knight example, even if you get to those rooms, the lore isn't immediately obvious. You still have to do the work of connecting the dots and thinking about it. Going back to your example of the room where the Collector was created, all you get is a mold of a creature with 4 arms. When I looked at that for the first time, I was like, interesting. And then I would just like walk away. It isn't until later on when I'm like going into the fridge and finding some food that it clicks in my mind like, oh, it's the Collector. That's where the Collector was. Yeah. And then you have to make the additional connection. That's also where the King's molds are made. And that the Collector is and that the Collector is, I'm assuming like a failed King's mold, right? In these best examples, the content doesn't have to be revealed within the game.
That's right? True. Is that a product of like the hidden path? I think that's just like lore and storytelling.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that. In order to get that information, you do have to like access a hidden path. You're right. The creators of Hollow Knight clearly intended for the player to connect the dots on their own. Like they don't spoon feed that information.
It's a delicate art of giving you just enough breadcrumbs for you to piece together it yourself. You get enough information by seeing, oh, the Collector is made of this certain substance and it has like this certain particle effect. And then I see this particle effect appear in different parts of the game. And now that I'm seeing like these same details and patterns in this room, I'm going to connect the dots. They're going to get it if you did the proper work of leaving the right hints.
There's a related example. In Pokemon Emerald, there's a house in Sootopolis City. You go inside the house, and there's an old man sitting at a table. Beyond the table, there's a staircase that's literally blocked by some potted trees. And that's it. That's all you get. When I was younger, that staircase drove me crazy. Like, I look everywhere to try to find out how to get past that. I talked to the old man like 50 times. I talked to every single NPC in Sootopolis City to try to get a little hint of how to get past it. It turns out that you need like a special device in order to get past it. There's this really interesting video by RFX. We'll link to it in the description. RFX edits his ROM to make this staircase usable. He removes the sprites. He modifies the warp points in a way that you can use it. I definitely recommend you go watch the video for yourselves, y'all. Long story short, it turns out it's an e-reader feature. For folks who don't know, the e-reader is a GBA, a Game Boy Advance card scanner attachment that lets you unlock new content by physically scanning cards using the e-reader. And the staircase was meant to stage battles that could only be accessed by scanning the e-reader cards. Going back to hidden paths, when I was younger, and I had no idea what that staircase was, my imagination would go wild. What is behind that? What is beyond that staircase? What is this old man hiding? Is this like, is this a part of his past? Is he some legend that this legendary trainer?
This old man is just terrible at interior design. Who puts potted plants in front of a staircase?
Yeah, if it was the real world, then we could just go past it, like knock down those trees.
I know.
Old man. And even though this particular path isn't particularly hidden. The fact that you can't get past it and the fact that there's no clues surrounding it made me at least form a whole like backstory of like what could be beyond there. Like what's the story of this? In a sense, it could be its own hidden path.
That was your experience of this door, not knowing what was behind it. You just started coming up with scenarios of what could be behind it, right?
Yeah.
Imagine when you look it up and all Bulbapedia had to say was, there is nothing behind this door.
That would be kind of disappointing.
Do you think that would be disappointing? Like, because if you think about it, does that actually ruin the experience of that door?
Finding out the real purpose of that door was super exciting. It definitely settled a decade and a half long mystery in my life. The existence of this mystery is somehow more intriguing than having the mystery be solved. It's kind of like how in stories, like sometimes storytellers leave a detail in the story that's just never explained. If I were to go to One Piece, for example, after one of these arcs called the Thriller Bark arc, as the crew leaves Thriller Bark, the island, there are some giants hidden in the fog in the background that are just never explained. Maybe it's explained by folks who have connected dots that I didn't know existed, but to me, it's still not explained.
Low-key, maybe we just gotta wait 500 more chapters, but...
Probably. Well, like, knowing Oda, he's probably got set up. And I think that the fact that it hasn't been explained yet is really nice to me. I think it would be fine if it were never explained. That mystery existing there, it implies the existence of more to know than the content itself can ever provide. And that expands the story world in ways that are really nice, you know?
Definitely. I feel with you. What do you think about paths that aren't as obvious as 3 potted plants in front of a door?
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, for me, this acts as like less of a hidden path and more of a restricted path. You are meant to go through this, whether it be later or, you need to have some kind of unlockable to get through these potted plants. Because there's varying levels of hiddenness when it comes to hidden paths in games. In the Super Mario Bros. Game for, I believe it was the Wii or the Wii U, there were hidden paths in the levels of the Mario games. This is an example of varying levels of hiddenness. You can see in this photo that there's this part of the wall that is indented, or it just looks different from the rest of the wall, and it's a pretty clear indicator. And as soon as you walk towards the right through it, it reveals this hidden room. So like that can be deemed as a hidden path because it's not obvious to the naked eye. If you're speeding through the level, you can easily miss this. But then if we go to an example of, say, in Pokemon Platinum, there's a location in the game called Wayward Cave. Wayward Cave is located underneath a bridge. And so you would go down this bridge as kind of like a transfer point from one city to another. But then if you go to the bottom of the bridge, you can take a path that leads you to another area that is located in the same visible space. It's just underneath the bridge. And so where Wayward Cave is located is underneath the bridge, like directly under the bridge, out of sight, which is pretty mind-boggling. There's a lot of things I want to say about Wayward Cave because, for one, it is extremely hidden. The way you find this cave is, with most caves in the game, you can see an entrance to the cave. But with Wayward Cave, you never see an entrance to the cave. The most hints the game gives you is that there is 2 entrances to the cave. They're both labeled like Wayward Cave. And then there is one NPC in this area that tells you there are supposedly 2 entrances to Wayward Cave, but I can only find one. And so you just have to literally do some trial and error of keep pressing up on the D-pad until you find the path that leads you to the second entrance. So first of all, what do you think about the varying levels of hiddenness in hidden paths? So like Mario, where the path is kind of hidden, but it's still obvious enough that if you're looking out for it, you'll find it, versus Wayward Cave, where it is truly hidden and that you will need to do some detailed detective work in order to find this location.
I didn't know about that NPC. I know what cave you're talking about. And I remember as a kid trying to explore Wayward Cave. As a kid, I was trying to find Gible, which is a dragon type Pokemon that evolves into Garchomp, one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. And I really, really wanted a Garchomp. All I knew was that it was found in Wayward Cave. I remember as a kid going through all of Wayward Cave, at least like through the easily accessible entrance. But man, I just couldn't find it. And it turns out that that Gibble can only be found through the hidden entrance that you're talking about. After I found that out, I was like, oh, come on. I did not enjoy that at all. But then again, that was Kid Me's experience when I had like a lot less analytic thinking and all that stuff.
But I think Pokemon is designed for kids. So could you call that bad game design? Because if it's made for kids, and as a kid, you are frustrated by the fact that you can't find Gibble as easily as you thought. The detective work as a child to find Gibble was you went to the Pokedex and you used the location feature on the Pokedex, and then it showed you, oh, Wayward Cave. But then you go to Wayward Cave and you're like, why can't I find Gibble?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's necessarily bad design because they do give you the hint, like you said. There's an NPC that tells you that there are 2 entrances to the cave. I probably could have put together those dots if I thought about it more. Yeah, I say that's not necessarily bad game design because I remember that in Gen 3, when I played Pokemon Ruby, there's the infamous Regi puzzle where in order to unlock the caves where Regice, Regirock, and Registeel are found, you have to go through this convoluted Braille. This convoluted Braille.
You gotta learn
puzzle.
a whole nother language.
Yeah. In order to find the Regis, you have to have access to Braille. And then you have to manually like translate the messages that allow you to find the Regis. There's some more steps to that. But long story short, it's infamously convoluted. And as far as I can tell, like seen by other people as bad game design. But for me, I loved that puzzle. I knew Braille. Well, I didn't know Braille, but I remember having the manual, the guidebook that comes with Pokemon Ruby when you first get that game. And in the back, there's a table that lets you decode Braille.
Do they explain why they have that?
I'm not sure if they explain why it's there, but I do remember it being there. Since it was there, I was able to figure it out. But then again, like I was also one of those kids who would go through all of the content. I would talk to every single NPC. I would read all of the Pokédex entries multiple times. I would go through the manual multiple times. It was only because I had that disposition that I could have like solved that puzzle. So like I could see like for other people, it might not be a good experience. So going back to your question about like whether or not it's good game design to have Wayward Cave be hidden like that. Does good game design, should it depend on the particular person who's playing the game?
When it comes to puzzles like these, good game design requires that you give your player all the tools they need to complete a puzzle. And so I think it's an absurd request for your player base to have to learn how to read Braille to solve a puzzle. You just coincidentally had the handbook, which not everyone's going to have. And
That's
not
true.
everyone's going to have prior knowledge of Braille. The only justification for that is if the mention of Braille was made prior to that puzzle in the game. I'm not as familiar with the puzzle as you are, but I would hope that Braille is not just some random thing that you have to utilize when solving this puzzle. Because for me, just hearing this, it comes out of nowhere. Pokemon has nothing to do with like Braille. Like, well, maybe it does. I don't know. I could be wrong.
No, I don't think it does.
Okay. Then I think like, it's funny I say this because I really love that puzzle too, but for different reasons. I love how dumb it is that you do have to use Braille. I find that really funny, but like I do think that games should give you all the tools you need to solve a puzzle. If they're going to ask you to learn Braille, there should be some old man. He can even be like halfway across the map in the game who tells you like Braille is somehow relevant in your playthrough.
Yeah, I think that would be a better way of providing that information. Maybe that NPC could say something like, I've been researching these legendary Pokemon called Regirock, Registeel, Regice, and these symbols are somehow related to them, but I don't know how. I think that would be a pretty cool addition to the lore. I agree with you. The player shouldn't have to use a physical handbook in order to unlock that content.
So this experience of the Braille problem in Pokemon, do you think it's immersion breaking? Do you think hidden paths can be immersion breaking? Another example is Wayward Cave, because I don't know if this was good or bad game design that they put the cave entrance out of view underneath a bridge. And so why I think it's a little immersion breaking is because the only reason why that cave is hidden is because you look at the game from a top-down view, and so you see the bridge first. But if you were experience the game in like a first-person view, you would obviously have no trouble seeing the cave because you would be under the bridge as well, and you could see it right in front of your face. You see what I'm saying? Like, because of how the game is situated, that's what makes it hidden. So in reality, the hiker, the NPC who tells you that there's 2 cave entrances should have no problem finding the cave. So what do you think about that?
When you were first mentioning it, I thought to myself, nah, that's not really immersion breaking because the brain of the character is you. And whether or not the character goes inside Wayward Cave is really up to you. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily immersion breaking if viewed from that perspective. But then you mentioned that the hiker is looking for the hidden entrance. And you know, you're right. Like this hiker, where do you find them? Do you find them within the normal entrance to Wayward Cave?
I believe he's like on the left side of the bridge. He's in the area where Wayward Cave is.
What? He's right there? Just look behind you.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean?
It's that bad.
Oh, I'm trying to find a secret entrance to Wayward Cave. I heard that there was another one. Where could it be? And then it's like right next to them. You know what? If you think about it, yeah, it's a little immersion breaking. But I don't think it's like too bad because you have to think about it a little bit in order for it to not make sense. I think it would be more egregious if this kind of plot hole were more obvious.
I think it brings up this interesting question. How should you address the player? Should you address the player in a way that speaks more directly to the gameplay, or should you address them that speaks more directly to the world and story you're trying to create? There's a lot of games that are super immersive and all the characters that you talk to are super ingrained into their roles. But I know I get a little taken out of it when all of a sudden I get a menu that pops up that tells me to swing your sword, press Y. You know what I mean? Breath of the Wild, the first time you enter one of the combat shrines, they give you a tutorial on how to do perfect dodges and counterattacks and parries. For obvious reasons, they have to explicitly tell you how to do this. And I didn't like that. I could see why it's necessary, but that takes me out of it. And so that's a question I had when thinking about the concept of Wayward Cave of like, I should be able to see this. Like, it's just a bridge, you know?
Maybe the execution wasn't the best it could be. I think it depends on what kind of game you're making. Going back to like the Mario example, it depends on how important world consistency is. If you spend any amount of time thinking about the Mario games, it's not going to make sense, right? Like who is this guy? He's like a plumber. His day-to-day job is supposedly being a plumber, and yet he's going through this fantastical world trying to save a princess. Like, what about your rent, dude? Like, what about your apartment? If a hidden path in a Mario game can be theoretically viewable by Mario himself, I don't think that would be as bad because you're not supposed to think about the consistency of the game anyway. It doesn't make sense anyway. But with games like Pokemon, the Legend of Zelda games, you're supposed to immerse yourself in the world. The world is supposed to be consistent. The ways by hidden paths are hidden should also be consistent with the story world.
I'm thinking about if the hidden paths in the Pokemon games are consistent. A lot of the other hidden paths in Pokemon Platinum, at least, are fairly standard. A lot of them are hidden by surf mechanics. In Pokemon, any body of water you find, you can surf on it or you can move across it. There's bodies of water everywhere. They'll design towns and cities in ways that like, oh, this is just, the town's pond. There's nothing special. But lo and behold, if you travel on that pond for like a little bit further than your standard viewing screen, you'll see that pond extends into a path that leads you to an item, like in Canalave City. If you surf down alongside the boats south of the city, you'll find a hidden path that leads you to an item. That's why Wayward Cave has me has got me going. I'm like, this feels not fair. And there's another topic I wanted to bring up. It's how do you feel when certain exclusive rewards are only found in hidden paths? Wayward Cave, that's the only place you can find Gibble. And fun fact, that's the only place you can find TM10 Earthquake, the most powerful ground type move in the game.
If the hidden Wayward Cave path had something that was absolutely required for the story, and the only hint that the game gave you was that confused hiker, you can theoretically see the hidden path.
I know. Come on, man. Look behind you.
Then that would be unfair for sure. On the other extreme, if the hidden path for Wayward Cave had nothing of note, I think that'd be fine. But here, like, we have like this middle situation where you don't necessarily have something that's required for the main story of the game, but there is a spawning area for a Pokemon that you can only get in that area. And there's like a TM that you can only get in that area. It does smell a little unfair. I guess it depends on how big the reward you get is.
Those are two pretty big rewards.
They seem pretty big rewards, like Gibble, which will eventually leads to Garchomp, and Earthquake, which is a pretty powerful and important move in the game. I'd say those are pretty big rewards.
We no longer play video games in a vacuum. There are always communities behind any game you play. Do you think it's okay for a single player to never find certain aspects in a game because they're very well hidden? But if they like the game enough, there are going to be other players that did find it. And people talk. You talk with your friends about games, and then they will tell you where Earthquake is or where Gibble is. What do you think about that aspect where you get the opportunity to learn more about your game by talking with others?
I don't think the community that you have access to should play an impact on how fair the hidden paths are. I think a player should theoretically be able to figure out every secret on their own if they play with it enough. I think we're getting into something a little deeper when it comes to puzzle-like mechanics, like hidden paths. You can't make it too easy, or else, well, it'll be obvious, and the reward at the end won't feel like you've worked for it. But on the other hand, it can't be so hard that the player will feel frustrated and make it feel like that path is unfair to take. That balancing act is pretty fundamental to game design, and like striking that good balance will always be a difficult question. I'm not sure if the community you have access to should play a part in this particular aspect of game design.
All right, what's your favorite hidden path of all time?
What is my favorite hidden path?
One of my favorite hidden paths is from a game called Bloodborne. And in Bloodborne, every time you die, you get returned to a place what's called the Dream. The Dream incorporates a garden and a house. And then there's this doll character that you can talk to that allows you to upgrade your character. So that's the Dream. When you play through the game, you leave the Dream and you go to what's thought of as the real world. Halfway through the game, there's this super hidden area that my friend had to tell me about. You're in this really dark building with precarious platforming, and you have to make this kind of suicidal looking leap to a platform far down below that you can't see, and it's only indicated by like a rope that does not really indicate that there's a platform there at all. It's just...
that's pretty cool. So it's literally a leap of faith.
It's a leap of faith. And then after that leap of faith, you got to do like two more kind of mini leaps of faiths. And then you get to this door that leads you to this long staircase. You go down the staircase and then you reach a garden and then you reach a house and then you realize, oh my God, this is just the Dream, but in the real world. And then as you go through the house, the doll character that you usually talk to in the Dream, I believe you either find her as like an inanimate object or you find the doll's clothes. And it gives you this weird sense of like eeriness of like, oh my God, is this doll alive? Is it dead? Like what does this mean? It honestly gives you more questions than it answers.
I love content that produces that effect, like you just mentioned, like raising more questions than answers. Sometimes the unresolved mystery is a better experience than having the mystery be resolved. And I think that's a great example of that.
That's why when it comes to hidden paths, lore is always my favorite thing that I get out of it. I don't need another potion. I don't need a great ball. Give me the story. Give me the juice.
Right. For me, my favorite hidden path is actually the Regi puzzle. There's a town called Pacific Log Town out in the middle of the ocean. There's a really long route between Pacific Log and a city called Sootopolis City. On that route, there's a really strong current that makes the path effectively one way. I remember going through that route and just like sailing along it. And it's really fun because you're zipping by, whee! And then all of a sudden, I see this cave entrance. And as I'm zipping by, like, whee! Like, I see the cave entrance, like, oh, what's that? Oh, wait, I want to go back there. and then I hit Sootopolis City, and I'm thinking about, oh, what was that? I remember going back to Pacific Log Town, going back onto that route, trying to navigate the currents to try to get to that cave. And it turns out, once you finally figure out how to navigate there, you go inside the cave, and the Regi puzzle begins. You go inside the cave, and then this eerie music pops up. Da 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 dun, da da dun. It gives you shivers. And at the end of the cave, this really long, wide cavern is a bunch of braille symbols. And when I first saw that, I remember thinking like, oh, what is this? I remember getting like a little bit spooked as a kid. Here was this massive cavern in the middle of the ocean that was insanely difficult to get through. You had this eerie music in the background. And then after you spend some time walking through the cave, there are these symbols you don't understand. Disregarding the infamously difficult puzzle, the atmosphere of that environment gave me a sense of like, wow, I'm really discovering something here. That was my favorite aspect of the hidden path.
There's no explanation for it, right? There's no one there telling you like, oh, by the way, there's something special in this cave. You just stumble on it.
You just stumble across it. Maybe that's like a choice. The places where the Regis are hidden, they are hidden in these small mountains in the middle of nowhere. Each Regi is hidden within a small stone spire surrounded by 6 other smaller boulders. When I first came across those, I was like, huh, what's that? And then I remember counting another one. I'm like, oh, it's just like that other one from way back there. Like, I don't remember where, but like, this is really familiar to me. Once I came back to that cave in the middle of the ocean and figuring out the puzzle, realizing that those weird rocks like were related to this cave. It was so cool having that connection finally click in my mind. I have to agree with you there. Like, if you're gonna have a hidden path, make it lore related. Give the player like an experience. Don't necessarily like give them like just a rare Pokemon or another TM. Imagine if Wayward Cave had its own lore behind it, right? Like, imagine if there were signs of a long lost civilization hidden within the cave. Maybe one that like worshipped Garchomp or something. That would have been so cool.
When I was doing some research into Wayward Cave, I got spoiled a little, and it turns out Wayward Cave is also in Legends Arceus. And so I'm really excited to play that game because apparently Wayward Cave it's also hidden in Legends of Arceus.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah,
I keep finding more reasons to buy and play Legends Arceus. It seems to be a game design choice to give the player more information about the Regis. Like, for example, maybe the puzzle could have been more smooth if the idea where we were talking about earlier, where there's an NPC who is researching the Regis and you're given a braille table within the game, that could have made the experience more smooth in terms of the puzzle solving aspect. But in terms of the exploration and discovery aspect, I feel like it would have actually hindered it. One of my favorite parts of that whole experience was the fact that it just came out of nowhere. That like there were no hints to it at all.
Are there any final things you want to say about hidden paths and it as a mechanic?
There are some other things I would like to talk about. If we were to make a game where the meat of the content is only accessible through hidden paths, I wonder what that would look like. But maybe that's a story for another time.
I would love to revisit the topic of, that doesn't even have to be hidden paths. I also thought about talking about hidden items today. Like, there's so many hidden aspects in games, things to explore and find. We're definitely going to come back to this.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's put that on the table for another time.
Well, this has been VG Mechanics. This is KBF.
And this is Pixel Pipeline.
And